We're joined by a gentleman who is no stranger to the Observer. Let me say a pleasant good evening to Pointe Pierre MP and the Opposition Chief Whip David Lee. Pleasant good evening, Mr. Lee.
Pleasant good evening to you, Mikee K, again, and your viewers and listeners.
Yes.
Again, it's a pleasure being on your program once more.
Always good to have you on. Of course, so much is going on at this time, and really want you to connect the dots so that way the average citizen out there can understand what is taking place. The opposition leader, the Honorable Kamala Prasad-Visesa, said it was convenient for all five MPs to be absent from Parliament last Friday. She said, and she believes that could have defeated the government on its motion last Friday had the five absent MPs been present. And of course, looking at what was said by you on your press conference, you said that last Friday's sitting was a private members' day where opposition business took priority. And in an effort to demand justice for the families who fell victim to the catastrophic events at the NICU, the opposition took a decision to continue debate on the health motion filed by the member for Caroni East. And today, of course, there's so much being said. Even the member for Naparima, Rodney Charles, stated is that what is clear on that fateful date is that Kamala Prasad-Visesa, Dave Tanku, and Saddam Hussein came fully prepared to debate the motion. Who advised them to prepare is a question best answered by the Chief Whip, Mr. David Lee. Please tell us.
All right, Mikee, this is not my normal position when I speak on your show. I normally talk from a angle of energy. So again, this afternoon is not the position that we are in Parliament and with the five members of the five MPs who have issues. I would use the word issues. What happened on Friday, Mikee, and my release says it all. It was Private Members' Day. We continued, and all MPs, members of Parliament, were aware that we were continuing the debate because it was Private Members' Day for Caroni East, because we felt what has been happening in the last two weeks or more about the issues with the deaths of the babies at the Port of Spain General Hospital, that the motion that Caroni East had brought previously back in January that was debated as far back as January about the healthcare system. We felt it was a good debate to continue given what was happening in the country and in our health sector at the time. That was announced by all. We asked and everybody agreed with it was a good motion to continue given what happened, what has been happening. As always, as Whip, I always prepare my members, and I always have a catch-all phrase that anyone who wants to debate, even though they were not identified up front, that anyone who wants to debate, please indicate as such. All right? So that's the norm that we normally do in our caucus and so forth. What happened on Friday was a strange twist because the Private Members' Day traditionally has always been, it ends at 6 o'clock. It has been in the past, I remember previously and maybe on 2 or 3 occasions that the government had brought something, government business after 6 o'clock. And they don't normally tell us that. This government, this present government is not always upfront with the opposition and sharing information. What happened around late Wednesday night, I think close to midnight, we all got a supplemental order paper where the supplemental order paper meant it was an additional order paper to what had gone out previously in the week. And on that supplemental order paper, there were basically 3 items. It had 2 papers to be laid, meaning that the auditor report, the auditor general report, reports were to be laid, and also they had under government business a motion where the extension of time under the Exchequer Act was a motion that the government was going to bring. The government at that point in time, when the order paper went out, did not indicate to me as Chief Whip that they were going to debate that motion on Friday, because I was always under the impression that on 6 o'clock on Friday, private members' day would end, and the sitting would end, even though there was a supplemental order that put out. What had happened is that even though a supplemental order paper goes out, we all get the supplemental order paper, and it started to trigger something in our minds, and as my mind, why would they bring this supplemental order? And when you looked at this, at the motion, it identifies some issues with the Auditor General. When we came into Parliament on Friday, up to Friday, we weren't told by the government that we're going to debate the motion. But as any good opposition, which we have learned in the past, we always have to be on our guard. We always have to be aware of what is happening with this government, because they always try. Even Saddam Hussein, the MP for Barataria, San Juan, and even the MP for Opuch West, Dave Tanku, those three individuals, while they spoke, they weren't prepared. They started to prepare when we got an inclination during the course of the afternoon that this government was going to debate that motion of the Auditor General after 6 o'clock. All right, so that we were in the chamber. I mean, everybody was in the chamber, and so that the opposition leader getting up to debate was based on her experience and of understanding the issues that she was able to debate after Minister of Finance presented that motion at around 6:05 thereabout. So that the whole issue that Mr. Charles is making, to me, is a red herring. It is uncalled for. Several times in the past, Mikee K, we have always tried. This government always tried to catch us off guard, and we as an opposition is fully aware of the tricks that they can try, and it has happened in the past. And we adjust our strategy to suit what is happening at the moment.
Then let me ask you this, Mr. Lee. Is it that this was an opportunity that the government saw and basically went in for the political, taking advantage, should I say the political lash, because there it was?
Well, since the whole issue of the 5 MPs and you know, what they feel and how their strategy and what they're thinking about the party and the opposition leader and so forth. The government is fully aware of that, and they are trying to take advantage of that. Because, for example, the week before Mikee K, the government bought a motion which they knew, which was a special majority, a 2/3 bill, all right, on the Constitution. The government fully knew well that they did not have the votes to pass that piece of legislation. They knew that. But they came to test on our side to see really which one of the 5 that is out there in the public domain would have voted with the government. So the government is also utilizing what is going on in our party with these 5 members at this point in time to their own advantage. And it doesn't augur well for us, and I'm very disappointed in a statesman. I call him a statesman as Mr. Charles. I mean, Mr. Charles has been in our party for a while. He has admitted that. He has been a solid supporter of Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, going back in 2015 when she made him our campaign manager. She made Mr. Charles our campaign manager back in 2015. And we lost that election. He was the campaign manager, and as a campaign manager, he even put in a nomination for a seat as the MP for Naparima, and he got it. He got that seat and to represent Naparima. So I'm a bit taken aback, given the experience of Mr. Charles at his age of 74, and has been a strong supporter of Mrs. Persad-Bissessar, even up on Friday, Mikee K. Mrs. Prasad Bissasa's opposition leader led off the debate in the health motion. She was powerful, and Mr. Charles was the most vociferous supporter, pounding the desk for Mrs. Prasad Bissassa when she spoke. So we are confused by what Mr. Charles is now saying when he made a release to say that I think his heading was bad mind. Let me get the correct quote from Mr. Charles. I just want to get it plain talk, bad manners. That was Mr. Charles' release this evening, today, and basically saying he's a better member of parliament than our opposition leader. He's literally saying that in his release. Plain talk, bad manners.
But my thing is this, Mr. Lee, and there's some contradictions here, because the fact of the matter is that in the press release that Mr. Charles sent out, it also states that the Chief Whip sets the tone and indicates the importance attached to bills being debated. Why should that have any sort of, why should that be relevant when in fact that last Friday was Private Members' Day, which where opposition business takes priority? What other tone needs to be set?
I'm at loss to what Mr. Charles is trying to allude to. I have, as whip, I have been whipped since 2017, if my memory serves me correct. I have been very transparent and open with all our members between 2015 to 2020 and presently from 2020 to present. I have been very transparent and open with all our members, and I've allowed every member, bar none, I have never stifled any member from speaking. All members, given with the opposition leader, has always said that members need to speak. And if you look at Mr. Charles' track record, he and all has put down how many times he has spoken in debates. Right. What does that say? What does that say about? Doesn't that say that he has gotten his fair share of debates? He has gotten. Anytime Mr. Charles has asked me to speak, I have always allowed him to speak. We have never stifled Mr. Charles. You have never stifled Mr. Charles. So for Mr. Charles now to come and raise some issue about the whip, given the indication that I am stifling the members, that is the furthest thing from the truth, and that is why I take umbrage on Mr. Charles making accusations which are unfounded. Mr. Charles also made an accusation about he spent 30 minutes in the conference room, and that was never raised about the Auditor General. If Mr. Charles had stayed longer, and I doubt he really stayed 30 minutes, if he had stayed longer, he would have seen that there was a discussion being held by a senior member, Dr. Munilal, who was giving us his experience of what could have happened, based on that supplemental order paper. And if Mr. Charles had stuck around, he would have been part of that discussion. All right, so that for Mr. Charles to come and say he spent 30 minutes and nothing was raised is disingenuous. Well, I did, at the little bit of time that Mr. Charles spent in the caucus room, I did raise and I reminded him. I did not have to remind him about, I did remind him that on the order paper he has 4 questions to ask. I did not have to remind him of that. That is the duty and responsibility of each member of parliament who represents a constituency, that their role, they represent not themselves, they represent a constituency to be in parliament, to represent your constituents in parliament from whenever parliament starts at 1:30 to when it ends, whatever time it ends. Yeah. That is your responsibility.
Even going back to what you said, Mr. Lee, the fact that you were a bit confused last Friday, because here you had Mr. Charles thumping on the desk, supporting the political leader throughout the debate, and then having this thing collapse, fall apart. Now, for those who are on the outside looking in, it's like, okay, listen, you have an issue with whatever your issue is, and we don't want to get into that because that's something perhaps of a personal nature. Those who are calling for internal elections, those who believe that people need to step down. But there has to be something said when you cross the line, that political line, where it is that you go to Parliament, which is the opposition, in the interest of the people, to represent the people who don't definitely have a voice, but you are there to deal with our business as citizens. And we see this whole calamity falling apart where this one is saying that I wasn't told and the tone wasn't set by the chief whip, and we don't, I mean, how do we expect this to play out in the eyes of the citizenry?
It doesn't augur well in the eyes of the citizenry, Mikee K. But I want to ask, Mr. Charles, why he fell out of love of Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, because Mr. Charles, MP Charles, has been one of the biggest fighters and supporters of Mrs. Persad-Bissessar since I have been in opposition in 2015 to present. Mr. Charles sits on the left side of her in Parliament. He sits in number 3 seats, which is a very important seat, and that is how high Mrs. Persad-Bissessar treasures Mr. Charles. She has put him to sit in number 3, not yesterday, for a number of years that he has been sitting in number 3 seat position with next to Mrs. Persad-Bissessar. That says a lot what she thinks of Mr. Charles, and Mr. Charles should come now and say, plain talk, bad manners, that he seems to be better than Mrs. Persad-Bissessar. I mean, Mrs. Persad-Bissessar has over 25 years of experience in Parliament. She has been a prime minister. She has been a leader of the opposition. She has been a fighter for the people. For Mr. Charles now to come and put out a release and say all of a sudden, he seems to be better than Mrs. Persad-Bissessar, says something that it does not smell right.
All of that, Mr. Lee, basically overshadows the real core issues here, where we have babies dying in our hospital.
That's right.
And the mere fact that $2.6 billion cannot be accounted for should not be overshadowed by the emotions of people for whatever reason, whatever political acts they have to grind. Now, if you have a problem, you sit and you deal with it. But at this critical point, where we as citizens are demanding transparency and accountability, people are not there to play political games. Now, I have had many interviews with Mr. Charles, a very intelligent man, very, very intelligent. I mean, he's able to connect the dots, give clarity on many issues. But if you're so disenchanted, that is not the place nor the reason for you to grind your axe. Babies are dying, monies are unaccounted for, and the government is taking full advantage of that. And I really and truly hope that this thing is settled, because it simply does not add up. And again, those who are on the outside looking in can never look at this and say that we are moving forward as a country.
When you look at also the second debate on the Auditor General and that whole tampering of the independence of the Auditor General position, that institution of Auditor General, which we as an opposition have been fighting and reminding the population, even Mr. Charles have been a fighter for that. And to come now on a critical motion that this wicked government brought on Friday after 6 o'clock and not be there to not even maybe not debate, but to lend your time when it is to vote, you should have been there, because Mr. Charles has been a fighter talking about the erosion of the independence of institutions under this government. And there we had it on Friday, another independent institution was being eroded by this government, and Mr. Charles should have been there.
Yeah, and my thing is, if the fight is no longer in you, then you just need to simply walk away.
That's a very good point, Mr. Mikee K, because you see, I listened to Mr. MP Charles. MP Charles in one of his press conference talked about giving youth a chance, right? Mr. Charles, and he said he's 74. Whenever election is called, he might be 76 according to his number. I think it might be 75, he will be. And he's talking about giving youth a chance. I want to ask Mr. Charles, and if he is so about giving youth a chance, then maybe Mr. Charles should consider for calling, because he's calling for youth, to maybe step down as the MP for Naparima and have a by-election. Maybe some youths
might come up and be the next MP for Naparima. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, as well as in the release, it says that what took place on Friday demonstrated clearly a very disturbing trend of keeping certain MPs totally in the dark and deselecting these MPs from speaking on important bills. I do not, say what you may. I don't believe that the opposition leader is lacking that political maturity to silence anyone if it is you're making a valid contribution. Listen, I could be on the team, and the star player could be someone I don't like. It's someone that I certainly dislike 100%. But if they're there on the field, producing and making sure that we get the advantage to victory, then who cares?
Mikee K, I mean, again, Mr. Charles is being disingenuous. When you look at all 5 members, Mr. Charles might be one of the most vocal individuals who have debated according to his release, and it is true. On several occasions, Mr. Charles would have debated because that's the value that we saw in Mr. Charles in his debate, especially on national security, etc. MP Dinesh Rambali has debated on several pieces of legislation. I don't think MP Rambali is making a claim that he has been silenced. Even MP Rushton Parry has debated on several pieces of legislation, especially under his portfolio, which he shadows trade and digital transformation. Even Miss Anita Haynes, again, she shadows education, and Miss Anita Haynes has debated on several occasions. I don't think any one of them have ever said that the opposition leader or the chief whip have denied them from speaking. And that is why I'm taken aback by the claim that Mr. Charles is making. I really don't. I see clarification from Mr. Charles.
Yeah, and I think you wrapped it up well at the ending of your press release when you said, had some members not left, they would have been able to join our fight against this government's persistent attacks on our independent institutions. And that says a lot. If you're not going to unite with me, then you're simply not going to be at my side. And if you are not for me, then I can only say that you are against me. And this is a very critical time, and I don't believe this is the time that these games need to be played out.
Especially from a senior politician who has been a campaign manager for Mrs. Kamala Prasad-Bissessar. In 2015, he is a senior individual for Mrs. Prasad-Bissessar.
Any closing comments, Mr. Lee?
All I would say, Mikee K, that I'm not surprised. Every time election is in the air, we always seem to have these issues coming out for our party. I mean, everybody seems that they feel that they can be the leader. They feel that they can win an election. But it is more than that. Mrs. Prasad-Bissessar has the experience. She has done it, and she will do it again to be the next Prime Minister.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mikee K.